Well, here we are again, students. This one's a doozy. We're working on identifying simple, compound, complex, and compound complex sentences. I'm going to spend some significant time with you just reviewing the information that IXL gives you when you get a question wrong on what types of sentences they're looking at here. Before we get started though, let me tell you, if you do not yet know how to identify independent clauses and dependent clauses, this is going to be extremely difficult for you. So you need to probably stop right now and go back in and find how to identify independent and dependent clauses and spend some time in those. Trust me, it's not worth attempting it without knowing this. So that said, let's move on to what IXL has to say. So let's start here at the top. So a clause is a group of words that contains both a subject and a predicate. We call that a subject and a verb. An independent clause is a complete thought. It can stand alone as a sentence. A dependent clause is not a complete thought and cannot stand alone as a sentence. Think about it in terms of people, right? If you're independent, it means you can live alone and you're fine. If you're dependent, it means you can't take care of yourself, so you can't stand alone. So that's how I remember those two things. So here are some examples. We have the oranges on our tree are ripe. It can stand alone. The subject is oranges, the verb is are, and the thought is complete. It works just by itself. If we say the next one, after we pick up Kevin from work, now that clause can't stand alone, right? It's dependent. The subject is we, the verb is pick, but if you listen to it, after we pick up Kevin from work, it doesn't sound done, does it? It's dependent, and the reason, for those of you who remember from last year, is this word after. After is an awubis word, and that's the trouble, but don't worry too much about it. Just recognize that you need to be able to identify in your mind, is this thought standalone? Could it be a sentence, or can it not? Okay, so if you just have one of those independent clauses, you have a simple sentence. It's made up of a single independent clause. Now this one here is short. Ben and I spent all day relaxing at the pool, but sometimes we have much longer ones. They have a little one longer here. The simple sentences have introductory phrases, but the introductory phrase is actually part of the predicate. So in the winter, Ben usually wears his heavy coat, so you could rearrange that to Ben usually wears his heavy coat in the winter. The little in the winter phrase at the beginning is just part of the main thought. It's not like it's a separate one. But this is, again, kind of a short, simple sentence. They can get really long. Simple does not mean small. It just means only one thought. Okay, the next one we have on this one is a compound sentence. And a compound sentence is made up of two independent clauses joined by a coordinating conjunction such as and, but, or so. Do you remember the acronym that we use? That's right, kids. It is the good old fanboys. See if you can remember them. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. So we saw the flash of lightning, and seconds later we heard a rumble of thunder. We have two thoughts here. We saw the flash of lightning, and then seconds later we heard a rumble of thunder. Those are two thoughts. They're separated by a comma and a coordinating conjunction. So we had our first two types, a simple sentence, which is just one complete thought, and a compound sentence, which is two complete thoughts separated by a comma and joined by a conjunction. Now we have complex sentences. Complex sentence is made up of an independent clause and a dependent clause. The dependent clause in a complex sentence usually begins with a subordinating conjunction. Remember the awubis words? Or a relative pronoun. Subordinating conjunctions after, although, as, because, before, if, since, unless, until, when, and while. Awubis. Relative pronouns are words like that, which, who, whom, and whose. So let's just take a look at a few of them. If she ever gets a chance, Terry would love to visit the Egyptian pyramids. So the way I would look at this, if I were looking at it without knowing that it was an independent or a dependent clause, I'm going to take and just divide it up where I feel like my thoughts are splitting. So if she ever gets a chance, Terry would love to visit the Egyptian pyramids. Then look at each one by itself. If she ever gets the chance, let's get she gets, so I know it's a clause, but it doesn't feel done, right? I know it's dependent, and I know because of the word if. It's an awubis word. And then Terry would love to visit the Egyptian pyramids. I've got Terry would love, so I know it's a clause, but it can stand by itself, so it's independent. When I have a dependent plus an independent, I have a complex sentence. The next one is a similar kind of idea. During his trip to Italy, Tony visited the Trevi Fountain. which is in Rome. Now, I did something a little tricksy here. I broke it up where it felt like I should break it, but look at this. During his trip to Italy, when I'm looking for a subject and verb, there's no verb. Maybe trip could be a subject, but this tells me that this little phrase is actually part of another part of the clause. So it's actually part of this next one. So Tony visited the Trevi Fountain. Now I've got Tony visited, and that's a clause by itself. It's independent. Which is in Rome, which is the subject, is the verb, but it's dependent. So again, I've got an independent clause and a dependent clause, no matter what order, together that makes a complex sentence. So we've done simple, we've done compound, we've done complex. Compound complex is, of course, the most complicated one. It's a sentence made up of 2 or more independent clauses plus 1 or more dependent clauses. It means it has to have at least 3 total, right? So take a look. After Samantha left work, she stopped at the bank, and then she went to the gym. So Samantha left is subject and verb, but after Samantha left work, that's not complete, so that's dependent. She stopped at the bank, she stopped, and that's an independent because it could be its own thought. Then she went to the gym. She went, and that could be its own thought. So I have a dependent and 2 independent, which is the definition of a compound complex sentence. Now, if you look down a little farther, sometimes a dependent clause in a complex or compound complex sentence can interrupt an independent clause. Those are real tricksy ones. So you know how I saw up here where I divided them just with the slash marks where it made sense? This one, it doesn't work quite that well because I wouldn't go orcas that are kept in captivity often have dorsal fins. I wouldn't do that. So I have to just watch for the subjects and verbs. So I say, orcas, what? They have dorsal fins. So that's an independent thought. But there's this whole other thought, that are kept. But that are kept in captivity is dependent. So you see how it kind of interrupts it. So they don't do too many of these, but it can happen. So just watch for it. All right, that was a lot of explanation. And you might want to watch that a couple times or come back to it if you get a little stuck. But it's important to have a base to start with. And now let's look at some examples. Okay, let's start with an easier one. During last night's thunderstorm, a flurry of tiny hailstones danced across the roof of our house. If I were to break this where it felt like I should break it, I would do it here, and then I would check each section. During last night's thunderstorm, and I'd realize that there's only subjects in here perhaps and no verbs, so that doesn't actually work. So I'm looking for subjects and verbs. A flurry of tiny hailstones danced. Oh, there's a verb. What danced? Flurry of tiny hailstones danced, and that's a thought by itself. This is one clause, and one clause always means simple. Russia has a variety of natural resources, including oil, natural gas, timber, iron ore, copper, and lead. Now, all those commas might get a little confusing, but the truth is, I only have one verb in here. It's the verb has. Oops, sorry about that. Has, and who has? Russia has, and then there's just a list of all the stuff Russia has. So it's actually one independent clause, and one clause always means simple. Okay, after a potato blight destroyed Ireland's potato crop and precipitated the Great Famine of 1845, the country lost 25% of its population to starvation and emigration. So that's a longer sentence. I felt a natural pause here. Let's just start with that. After a potato blight destroyed, so what destroyed? The blight destroyed Ireland's potato crop and precipitated, it's actually doing 2 things. The blight destroyed and precipitated the Great Famine of 1845. So I've got a clause there, but listen to how it sounds by itself. After a potato blight destroyed Ireland's potato crop and precipitated the Great Famine of 1845, it's not done. It's not done because of that word. It's an awubis word, which makes this a dependent clause. So chances are, if we have 2 and one is dependent, the other one's going to have to be independent because every sentence has to have an independent clause. Let's check. The country lost 25% of its population. Country lost. Independent. Now, dependent plus independent equals complex. An avid reader, Mitchell attends weekly book club meetings, and he finishes several novels each month. Well, I felt a natural break here, so let's check. An avid reader, that's just a little phrase describing Mitchell, Mitchell attends weekly book club meetings. Mitchell attends, so I know it's a clause, and it could be a sentence by itself. It is independent. Okay, the next one. And he finishes several novels every month. Now I have to remember this little and. That's a conjunction, so I don't actually attach it to the front of this. These coordinating conjunctions don't really belong to either the clause. I just join them. So he finishes several novels every month. He finishes is my subject verb, independent. So I've actually got a compound sentence. Now remember, you don't have to watch these long videos all the way through. If you're getting a sense of what to do, go ahead and try it. And then if you get stuck, come back in and check some more. But I'm going to continue on here. And I see that in Beijing, China, 8 luxury residential towers that were designed by Stephen Hull architects are now connected on the 12th through 18th floors by enclosed glass and steel bridges. When I was reading that, I felt this disconnect between these two parts right here. I think this middle part is actually an interrupter. So let's look and see if I took that out, if the rest would go through. So in Beijing, China, 8 luxury residential towers are connected on the 12th through 18th floors. Do you see how this part actually belongs with that part? It is one clause together. So that's actually, so I've got the residential towers are connected. That's an independent clause. And let's look at the inside part. That were designed by Stephen Hull architects. I've got that, which is sort of my subject, were designed. Now, it might look that because the subject is the first word that it's going to be an independent clause, but it doesn't have enough information. That's one of those relative pronouns that makes it dependent. So I have an independent clause with a little dependent clause inside it, which is going to make it a complex sentence. Okay, Cindy is a competitive horseback rider, and she'll be competing in the next World Equestrian Games, which are held every 4 years. Okay, I felt natural breaks at the commas, which makes sense. That's what commas do, right? They break things up. Cindy is a competitive horseback rider. That is a whole thought. She will be competing in the next World Equestrian Games. She will be competing. Another whole thought. Which are held every 4 years. Which are held. Now this one though, which are held every 4 years, that doesn't work by itself. It needs more information, so that's dependent. When I have 2 independents and 1 dependent, I have compound, because of the 2 independents, and complex, because of the dependent. Okay, so we've hit all of our structures now, but if you'd like to hang out and look at a few more, we can do that. The platypus has venom-producing glands, which are rare among mammals, but its venom is not generally lethal to humans. I'm feeling these splits right here. The platypus has venom-producing glands, which are rare among mammals. That's dependent, because the which is a relative pronoun. But its venom is not generally lethal. That doesn't make sense, actually. Is not lethal to humans. Independent clause. 2 independents and a dependent. That's going to be compound complex. As cold weather approaches, you must protect your water pipes against freezing, or they can rupture and cause significant damage to your home. So, cold weather approaches. But as cold weather approaches, that's not a complete thought because the as is an awubis word, so that's a dependent clause. You must protect your water pipes against freezing. You must protect. It's a strong clause or an independent clause. They can rupture and cause significant damage to your home. They can rupture. Remember that the or, that's just a coordinating conjunction, so it's not actually attached. So I've got, again, boy, another one of these. 2 independents and a dependent. Compound complex. Annual plants survive only 1 season and must be replaced each year, but perennials return each year with new flowers and foliage. Okay? Annual plants survive only 1 season and must be replaced. So they survive and must be replaced. It's actually a compound verb, but it's still only 1 subject and it's still a complete thought. But perennials return each year with new flowers and foliage, so perennials return. The but is just a coordinating conjunction, so perennials return each year with new flowers and foliage. Independent. I've got 2 independents Separated with a comma and joined with a coordinating conjunction, that is compound. Okay, so let's say you watch this video and you watch it a couple times to try and learn it, and you try practicing this and you're putting good thought into it, and you have the list of the fanboys with you and the list of the Lewis words with you, and you're just really struggling. Kids, chances are you just aren't ready for this one yet. That's okay. We all get these things at different times, but it doesn't mean you can leave it there. When this happens to you, look at the bottom of the IXL. You'll see things like, are you ready yet? And these can help. It gives you some things to try. Identifying dependent clauses. Maybe you still need to work on identifying coordinating conjunctions or subordinating conjunctions, or just an earlier version, like a 6th grade version of identifying these types of sentences. Totally doable. It'll mean some more work, but that's what learning is. Learning is work, and it's worth it. So good luck, and see me if you need some help.